The courtroom was so silent, Charlotte could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. She stood handcuffed. A 26-year-old black woman with trembling fingers and a fire in her eyes she refused to let die. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow that made her look guilty before she even spoke. The bailiff's voice boomed, "All rise." Charlotte lifted her chin. She had been raised to show dignity even when the world tried to strip her of it. But when the judge entered, Judge Malcolm Reed, she felt the same dread she'd carried for months. Reed had always looked at her like she was a statistic, not a person. She swallowed hard. This was supposed to be a simple hearing about a minor property dispute, until her neighbor, Earl Watkins, had lied under oath, accusing her of assault. Now, she stood there labeled as violent, dangerous, angry, a stereotype she'd been fighting her whole life. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Never let them steal your truth. Baby." She really tried to stay calm as Earl took the stand. His smug grin was the same one he had worn the day he'd told her, "People like you shouldn't live in this neighborhood." But when Charlotte's attorney objected to one of Earl's fabricated statements, the judge slammed his gavel and glared at her. "Your client will remain silent. One more outburst and I'll hold her in contempt." She wasn't even talking. She was breathing, existing. That was the outburst. Then, everything snapped. Earl pointed at her dramatically. "She threatened me. Said she would burn my house down. That's a lie." Charlotte blurted out before she could stop herself. It was pure instinct, a human reaction to a blatant accusation. The courtroom froze. Judge Reed's eyes narrowed. "That's it." He signaled to the bailiffs, "Take her into custody for contempt." 2 officers moved toward her. Charlotte stepped back, fear gripping her spine. "No, please listen to me." "I didn't." Before she could finish, one of the cops shoved her hard, her knees buckled, and as she tried to catch her balance, the second officer slapped her across the face. The sound cracked through the courtroom like lightning. Gasps filled the room. Charlotte's cheek burned. Her vision blurred. She tasted blood, but what she felt most was the weight of a lifetime of moments, just like this, dismissed, disrespected, unheard. A woman at the back cried out, "Stop." She didn't do anything. The officers ignored her. Judge Reed didn't flinch. Earl smirked. Charlotte steadied herself and lifted her head with a calmness she didn't truly feel. "What more do you want from me?" she whispered. The courtroom doors suddenly burst open. Everyone turned. A man in a state attorney badge rushed forward, clutching a folder fat with documents. His expression was urgent, almost frantic. "Your Honor," he shouted, "stop the hearing immediately. We have new evidence, critical evidence pertaining to this case, and several others." Judge Reed looked irritated. "This is highly irregular." "Not as irregular as what we found," the attorney said, eyes locking onto Charlotte. "Ma'am, you need to hear this." The bailiffs hesitated. Judge Reed hesitated, and for the first time since the nightmare began, Charlotte felt a flicker of something she almost didn't recognize anymore. Hope. Charlotte's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the attorney speaking. But the way the courtroom shifted, the sudden tension, the whispers rippling through the crowd, told her this wasn't ordinary evidence. The officers stepped back reluctantly, releasing their grip on her arms. She rubbed her wrist where the handcuffs had bitten into her skin, but she kept her eyes fixed on the state attorney, Judge. Reed leaned forward with irritation, poorly masked by a thin layer of formality. "Mr. Lawson, you better explain why you've interrupted my courtroom with such theatrics." The attorney, a sharp-eyed man in his early 40s, opened the folder. Pages, dozens of them, fanned out like a storm. "Your Honor," he said, carefully enunciating each word. "These are official complaints, reports, and internal emails involving you, Judge Reed, and Mr. Earl Watkins." A stunned silence followed. Charlotte felt her breath catch. She glanced at Earl, his face drained of color. Judge Reed's jaw tightened. "This is outrageous. That folder could contain anything." Lawson's voice rose. "It contains proof. Proof that Earl Watkins has been bribing court staff, and Your Honor, to sway legal decisions in his favor for over 4 years. Gasps broke across the courtroom like a breaking wave. Charlotte blinked, unsure whether she'd heard correctly. Bribery, for years. Lawson continued. We discovered a pattern. Every time someone filed a complaint against Mr. Watkins' noise violations, harassment, property damage, the case conveniently disappeared. Witness statements lost. Evidence misplaced. Fines overturned. Always in this courtroom. Always under your jurisdiction. Earl stood abruptly. That's ridiculous. I've never, but Lawson cut him off, holding up a printed screenshot. This is an email from you to Judge Reed's clerk, time-stamped 6 months ago, thanking her for handling the Carter case. Does that refresh your memory? Charlotte's eyes welled. For months, she had been fighting to prove she wasn't the aggressor. For months, she had been dismissed, ignored, belittled, and all along, the game had been rigged. Judge Reed slammed his gavel. None of this has been authenticated. It has, Lawson said. Which is why the Attorney General's office ordered me to intervene immediately. Before another wrongful verdict was handed down. A low hum of shock rolled through the audience. The bailiffs glanced at each other nervously. Even they looked unsure of which side they were supposed to be on. Now, Lawson turned to Charlotte. Ms. Hayes, on behalf of the state of Illinois, I need to offer you an apology. Charlotte felt the air leave her lungs. An apology? From the state? I'm sorry, Lawson said, voice softening, that you were dragged through this. That you were hurt today. And that this court failed to protect you. Something inside her cracked, not from pain, but from the sudden, overwhelming recognition that truth was finally emerging. Judge Reed pushed himself out of his chair, face red. This is an ambush. You can't storm into my courtroom and undermine the rule of law. Lawson faced him calmly. With all due respect, Your Honor, the rule of law is exactly what we're trying to restore. The room erupted. Lawyers whispering fiercely, spectators pulling out phones, Earl sinking back into his seat like a child caught stealing. A bailiff approached Lawson. Sir, what do you want done with the defendant? Lawson glanced at Charlotte. She wiped a tear from her cheek and stood tall. Release her, he said, effective immediately, and place Judge Reed and Earl Watkins under investigative hold. The entire courtroom froze in stunned disbelief. Charlotte's legs trembled, but she refused to sit. She watched, breathless, as the bailiffs, the same ones who slapped her minutes ago, were forced to turn toward Earl, then toward the judge. For the first time in her life, she saw fear in their eyes instead of her own. And yet, beneath the justice unfolding, a new question entered Charlotte's mind. If they could betray the law this easily, what else were they hiding? The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as Cassandra lowered herself into the judge's chair. The air felt thick enough to choke on, thick with guilt, disbelief, and a dawning realization that no one in that room would ever forget this moment. The 2 officers who had slapped her officers, Blake and Rowan, stood frozen near the witness stand, their confidence draining from their faces like water from a broken pipe. When Cassandra finally looked up from the case file in front of her, her voice carried the kind of strength that is forged through years of walking through fire. Bailiff, she said calmly. Please approach. The bailiff who, only 30 minutes earlier, had flinched when the officers hit her now, straightened his back and crossed the courtroom with reverent steps. Cassandra handed him the paperwork. Certify these into the record. He nodded quickly. Yes, Your Honor. Those 2 words, Your Honor, rippled across the courtroom like a revelation. The gallery murmured. Reporters scribbled furiously. And Michael, sitting in the back row, tightened his grip around his phone, recording everything with trembling hands. Moments ago, he'd watched his mother get struck in front of a crowd. Now, he was watching her rule the very courtroom that had tried to intimidate her. His heartbeat felt loud enough to echo off the walls. Cassandra turned her eyes to the officers, stepped forward. They obeyed, though their steps were hesitant, as if every inch brought them closer to the truth they'd hoped would stay buried. Cassandra's gaze didn't waver. State your full names for the record. Officer James Blake, the first muttered. Officer Daniel Rowan, the second followed. When you struck me, Cassandra said, her voice steady, did you believe I was powerless? Neither answered. The silence was an admission all by itself, but Cassandra wasn't here to embarrass them. She was here to show the truth. She flipped open a folder on the bench and held up a printed photo. This is a still frame from the lobby security camera. It shows me identifying myself with my bar card and court-issued judicial badge. She lifted her chin. You ignored protocol, procedure, and basic human decency. Blake swallowed hard, staring at the ground. We made a mistake. Cassandra leaned forward slightly. No, you judged me on sight, on skin, on assumptions. Then her tone softened, still sharp, still powerful, but layered with something raw. I've walked in courts where people expect me to fail, and every day I fight to prove that justice still has a pulse. In the back row, an elderly white woman whispered to her husband, "My God." She tried to warn them. A second reporter whispered, "This is going viral tonight." Blake's voice trembled. "Your Honor, we didn't know that I was a judge." Cassandra interrupted gently. "You didn't need to know. You just needed to have respect for any human being." A hush swept across the room. Even the fluorescent lights overhead seemed to hum quieter. Then Cassandra lifted her gavel not to strike judgment, but to call the next witness. "Officer Blake," she said, "what was your justification for physical force?" He faltered. "We thought you were being disruptive." Cassandra didn't react harshly. Instead, she looked to the gallery. Michael, her son, stood instantly, heart racing. "Yes, Mama, I mean your honor." A few people chuckled softly. Cassandra allowed herself a small, warm smile. "Please approach." Michael walked down the aisle, his phone still recording. Cassandra nodded at it. "Show the court what you captured." The bailiff connected the phone to the courtroom monitor. Within seconds, the video played for everyone to see Cassandra, standing quietly, hands visible, saying, "I am an officer of the court, here to file an emergency injunction," followed by Rowan stepping forward and slapping the phone from her hand, while Blake pushed her shoulder with enough force to make several people gasp on camera. Watching themselves from a different angle shook the officers. Rowan visibly winced at the sight of his own hand. When the video ended, Cassandra folded her hands. "I am not here to punish, but I am here to uphold truth." She reached for another folder, thicker one. "This is a record of citizen complaints filed against both of you. 12 in the last year, 8 involving unjustified force." The gallery erupted into murmurs. Blake's knees weakened. Rowan stared at the judges' bench as if seeing the consequences of his actions for the first time. Cassandra exhaled quietly. Court officers should protect the people, not terrorize them. And trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. For a long moment, the room remained still. Then the door at the back of the courtroom swung open. A short, stout man in a suit hurried in, removing his hat. The district attorney, Mr. Callahan, looked flustered, out of breath, and completely unprepared for the scene before him. "Your Honor," he stammered when he saw Cassandra. "I didn't know you had taken the bench today." "Temporary assignment," Cassandra replied smoothly. "To handle this matter immediately." Callahan glanced between Cassandra and the officers. "Is this about the assault incident?" "Judge, if you want, we can settle this privately." "No," Cassandra said with quiet power. "Justice doesn't happen in back rooms." A young black woman in the gallery whispered, "Say it louder." Cassandra raised her voice slightly. "This will be handled the proper way, with transparency, fairness, and accountability." She stood. The room rose with her. "Officers Blake and Rowan, you are officially relieved of duty pending a full internal review and civil rights investigation." Bailiff, escort them out. The officers looked stunned, disgraced yet strangely relieved, as if the weight of years of misconduct had finally cracked open. Blake paused at the door. "Your Honor, I'm sorry." Cassandra nodded once, her voice warm but firm. "Then learn from this." When they were gone, Cassandra finally allowed herself to breathe. Her shoulders sagged for just a second, just long enough for Michael to rush to her side. He wrapped his arms around her, the kind of hug built from fear, gratitude, and pride all tangled together. "You were incredible," he whispered. "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for everyone." Cassandra cupped his cheek with one hand. "Baby, we fight so the next generation doesn't have to." A woman in the jury box wiped tears from her eyes. A man standing by the wall whispered, "That's justice right there." Cassandra turned back to the courtroom. "This court is still in session," she announced. "And justice will continue." Her gavel struck once clean, commanding, "Unforgettable." The echo felt like hope. When the gavel's echo faded, the courtroom slowly emptied, leaving behind the lingering energy of a moment that had already begun to ripple far beyond its walls. Reporters rushed outside to go live. Phones buzzed. Social media feeds exploded with clips titled, "Judge Cassandra Williams takes back her power." Within minutes, the story was everywhere from Chicago to Atlanta to Los Angeles. But Cassandra didn't care about going viral. Her only concern was her son. "I'm okay," she told Michael as they stepped out into the hallway, her voice softening now that the fight was over. "I promise." Michael shook his head. "You shouldn't have to be okay after that. None of it should have happened." She touched his arm gently. "That's why we change things." The hallway soon filled with strangers who had been in the gallery, people who had seen her humiliation, her strength, and her rise, all within the span of an hour. A middle-aged Latina woman stepped forward nervously. "Judge Williams," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been coming here for 2 months trying to get a restraining order. They keep telling me to come back later." She glanced at the door where the officers had exited. "Those same cops. They told me to stop wasting their time." Cassandra's heart tightened. "What's your name?" "Raina." Cassandra placed a hand gently on hers. "Raina, come with me. We'll file it now." The woman's eyes filled with tears of relief. Michael swallowed heavily, realizing this wasn't just about his mother's dignity. This was about every person who had ever been turned away, dismissed, or threatened just for seeking help. Cassandra led Raina back into the courtroom, reopened the bench, and within 10 minutes granted the emergency protective order, something Raina had been denied for weeks. By the time they left again, 3 more people were waiting quietly in the hallway. Word had spread that Cassandra was still inside, still helping. Michael watched his mother speak with them one by one, listened as she offered guidance, felt a kind of pride in his chest that almost hurt. But as the crowd thinned, a man in a grey suit approached mid-40s, polished, but with a nervousness that betrayed him. Cassandra recognized him immediately. Captain Reynolds, head of the precinct that had employed Blake and Rowan. "Judge Williams," he said, clearing his throat. "I came to apologize. Personally." Cassandra nodded, expression unreadable. "Thank you. But this isn't about me." Reynolds lowered his voice. "Those officers will be suspended without pay while the investigation is underway, and we're implementing mandatory training, real training, not the check-the-box kind." Cassandra studied him for a long moment. "Good, but make sure it's more than a memo. Make it culture." The captain bowed his head. "We will." When he left, Michael let out a slow breath. "Mum, people listen to you." Cassandra looked up at him, eyes softening. "Only because I refuse to be quiet."
They stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sky over the city glowed with fading orange, and a crowd had gathered near the courthouse steps. Neighbors, activists, students, families. Someone pointed toward Cassandra and shouted her name. Applause rose like a wave, full of gratitude and awe. Cassandra was stunned. She had never sought praise. She had only ever sought justice. A teenage girl with braids and a cracked phone case squeezed forward. "Ma'am, I saw what happened online. Can I hug you?" Cassandra hesitated, then opened her arms. The girl's embrace was tight, warm, emotional. "Thank you," the girl whispered. "My brother got roughed up last year. They said he resisted. Nobody listened. But you made them listen." Cassandra closed her eyes briefly, fighting tears. "You deserve safety and fairness. All of you. As the crowd cheered again, Michael put an arm around her shoulders. "Mom, this is history." But Cassandra shook her head gently. "No, this is the beginning." They walked down the steps together, surrounded by people whose lives she had touched without even knowing it. Camera flashes sparkled in the air. Voices rose in unity. For the first time in a long time, Cassandra felt the world leaning toward justice, just a little. Then a familiar voice called out from the sidewalk. "Mom!" A small boy, maybe 6, ran toward her, his mother chasing behind. Cassandra blinked in surprise. The boy wrapped his arms around her legs. "You're the lady from the video," he said proudly. "My teacher said you're brave." Cassandra laughed softly. "Your teacher is too kind." His mother apologized breathlessly. "I'm so sorry, Your Honor. He just wanted to say thank you. He's been having nightmares since the cops hurt his dad last year." Cassandra bent down to the boy's level. "I'm sorry that happened to your family," she said gently. "But listen to me." She placed a hand over his heart. "The world gets better because people like you grow up to make it better. Okay?" The boy nodded. "Okay." When they left, Michael stared at her in awe. "You just changed that kid's life." Cassandra took a slow breath. "We all have that power. Most people just don't realize it." They finally reached their car, but before they got in, Michael stopped. There was a question he had been holding back all day. "Mom, when they hit you, were you scared?" Cassandra paused. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because she had too many. "I wasn't scared for me," she said quietly. "I was scared that you'd have to watch injustice win again." Michael's eyes stung with tears. "It didn't win today." She brushed a hand through his hair the way she used to when he was little. "No. And it won't tomorrow either." As they got into the car, a warm glow from the courthouse lights spilled across the steps, illuminating the place where everything had changed. The next morning, Cassandra awoke to her phone vibrating nonstop. News channels were calling her a hero. Civil rights groups were requesting her presence. The mayor wanted a meeting. Her email overflowed with messages from people across the country sharing their stories, their pain, their hope. And then there was the video, shared over 50 million times in 12 hours. The clip of her rising to the judge's bench had become a symbol, a spark. But Cassandra didn't care about fame. She cared about momentum. She walked into her kitchen, where Michael sat scrolling through his phone. He looked up, eyes bright. "Mom, you've started something." Cassandra poured herself a cup of coffee. "Then we finish it." He nodded. "Together?" Cassandra smiled. "Always." And as sunlight spilled across the room, painting the walls gold, the world outside buzzed with new possibility. A movement had begun not with anger, not with violence, but with dignity, with courage, with truth standing tall in a courtroom where it had almost been silenced. One woman had taken back her power. And in doing so, she gave power to everyone watching. Because justice, as Cassandra always knew, doesn't belong to the powerful, it belongs to the brave.